In a far corner of the galaxy, hidden behind fields of drifting nebulae and black stardust, a place called the Veiled Expanse had become the eye of a storm that was growing beyond control. Here, the Varaxi swarm, an ancient hive-minded species of relentless war machines, had begun a campaign of total invasion, tearing through the border worlds like fire through dry leaves. The United Galactic Council, a coalition of over 60 intelligent species, had no choice but to respond. They summoned every available fleet to the contested system of Yoltar, where a massive wormhole acted as the only passage between this galaxy and the cluster of stars the Varaxi had already conquered. The gathering of fleets became the largest military force assembled in the known history of the stars. Giant ships from the Tenvac, shimmering with plasma shields, flew in perfect formation beside the cold. Jagged cruisers of the Draw, the insectoid Salari, brought their strange organic dreadnoughts, pulsing with living light, while the Scarran Armada arrived with enormous triangular ships carved from moon rock and dark metals. Every race brought their finest, their proudest, their strongest. But one species was missing, or so they thought. Earth, the newest member of the Council, had remained silent for weeks. Most expected humans to stay away from the front lines, especially since they had only joined the Council 25 years ago and had never engaged in a war beyond their solar system. Some believed humanity had nothing to offer. Others thought they were simply afraid. But that silence broke when the fleet registry was officially updated. Every admiral and tactician received the list of participating forces, and on the final page, beneath the names of empires thousands of years old, was a line that didn't make sense. It read, United Earth Directorate, 1 vessel, Uns Valiant. No ship class, no fleet number, no support. Just a name and a single vessel. At first, most assumed it was an error, perhaps a misplaced drone carrier or a science ship. The galactic media wasted no time in mocking it. News anchors laughed on air, commentators ridiculed the humans, and even low-level council officials shared jokes about the single brave canoe Earth had sent to a supernova. Yet not everyone was so quick to dismiss it. Admiral Threx of the Scarran Armada had fought in 22 Starfront battles and had read every classified report available on human military development. He had never met a human, but something in his instinct told him this was no joke. He had seen a pattern in their past quiet confidence, rapid adaptation, and an odd talent for using weakness as a form of strength. He ordered his long-range scout probes to monitor Sector Delta 9, the path from Sol to Yultar, and to his surprise, a single object was indeed on approach. It was the Uns Valiant. The ship did not travel with an escort, nor did it follow standard flight protocols. It jumped between systems using an energy pattern that none of the Scarran instruments could identify. The ship itself was a puzzle, unlike the towering carriers or monstrous dreadnoughts of the other fleets. The Valiant was smooth and long, almost like a needle cutting through space. Its hull was black, not polished or armored, but something deeper, like it absorbed light rather than reflected it. It had no visible weapon systems, no external cannons, and no energy shields were detected. Yet the reactor at its core gave off a pulse unlike anything Admiral Threx had ever seen. It was not wild or unstable. It was calm. Like a sleeping beast dot, as the Valiant approached the rendezvous point, several captains requested a full scan, but all attempts were blocked by interference. The ship carried a unique energy signature that scrambled radar and even disrupted advanced telepathic sensors. One Solari mind reader attempted to connect and immediately recoiled, describing the ship's mind as ancient and silent, but watching. The Valiant made no official hail, no request to dock, and ignored every protocol. It simply moved into formation, quietly positioning itself at the far edge of the Council Armada. Many officers laughed at this, saying perhaps the humans had sent a museum piece. But Admiral Threx remained quiet, watching the data, reading between the lines, and wondering why Earth would send such a strange vessel, if it was truly meant for war. The Council's War Command did not give much attention to the Valiant. Instead, they focused on strategy, assigning zones and deployment plans, preparing for a battle that would begin in less than 3 rotations. The Varaxi swarm, still beyond sensor range, was approaching fast. Probes had already detected gravity fluctuations, suggesting a mass large enough to cover 100 planets. And yet, the humans sent just 1 ship. The thought lingered in Threx's mind. Was it arrogance? Desperation? Or did they know something no one else did? He reviewed every record on human conflict, how they had once fought a world war with sticks and tanks, then jumped to orbital weapons in less than a century. He read about their victory against an AI uprising, how they won not with firepower, but with unpredictability. He read about how humans survived a cosmic plague by burning their own cities and restarting entire systems. Over and over, the pattern remained. They never had the best weapons, never the strongest fleets, but they always found a way. And now, here they were again. 1 ship, no explanation, no escort, just silence. A silence that made the Varaxi seem louder with each passing hour. Threx opened a private log and began writing a note to his command. He wrote, "Do not underestimate the Valiant. Watch it. Mark its path. I do not believe Earth sent it to die. I believe they sent it because they know something we do not." The Admiral paused, then added 1 more line before locking the file. "And if I am wrong, then we may all be doomed. But if I am right, the Valiant is not alone. It is the weapon." The sky above Yultar shimmered with light as the first signs of the approaching Varaxi swarm appeared on long-range sensors. Energy storms pulsed across the edges of space, flashing like distant lightning behind the dark curtain. A void. The Council Armada, a force of 10,000 ships gathered from every major civilization, began forming battle lines across the orbit of the gas giant Yultar II. Ships rearranged in complex layers, shields activated in wide formations, and carrier bays opened as waves of fighter drones launched in preparation. Admiral Threx stood at the center of the Scaron command deck, staring at the glowing tactical map. A storm was coming. Everyone felt it in the silence before the first shot. Everyone except the humans, who had not said a word since their lone ship, the Un's Valiant, had arrived. The vessel drifted like a ghost along the outer edge of the formation. It hadn't requested docking. It hadn't broadcast a call sign. It simply hovered there, silent and still, as if watching everything and revealing nothing. The Valiant looked small next to the mighty cruisers of the other species, but there was something deeply unsettling about its presence. Its black hull absorbed light instead of reflecting it, creating the illusion of a hole in space. Its shape was smooth, almost unnatural, no sharp edges, no weapon turrets, no visible engines. It was sleek like a dagger, floating without motion, yet clearly alive. Probes that came near it experienced strange static and sensor failure. AI systems near the vessel began glitching in subtle ways, nothing dangerous, but enough to make every tech crew uncomfortable. Admiral Threx's science team had tried to scan its power core, but all readings returned with undefined data. One Scaron engineer whispered that the ship did not register as metal or alloy, but something else, something ancient, possibly organic, but far too advanced for them to understand. Inside the Valiant, Captain Elias Ward stood alone at the center of the bridge, his hands behind his back, staring at the growing signals on the main screen. He was a quiet man with pale eyes, dressed not in a decorated officer's coat, but in a simple black uniform with no rank shown. Only a small badge on his chest bore the Earth symbol. His crew was shockingly small, one systems engineer working silently below deck, and one artificial intelligence integrated into the ship itself, called Riven. No command staff, no tactical officers, no communication teams. Just one man, one AI, and a ship that did not belong to any known era. "The swarm is accelerating," Riven's voice said softly, calm and cold like wind across ice. "They will breach sensor range in 3 minutes. We are still undetected." Ward did not move. His expression never changed. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We're not here to stop them. We're here to reveal them." Across the Council fleets, tension climbed rapidly. Alarms rang. Commands echoed across bridges. Shield frequencies were synchronized. Missile locks were set. Fighter squadrons took formation like clouds of metal bees around their carriers. Species that had once distrusted each other now stood side by side. They were all united by fear. The Varaxi were not an empire. They were a consuming force, spreading like infection. No one had ever won a direct battle against them. No negotiation had ever worked. They did not stop, did not communicate, did not hesitate. And now, the largest swarm ever recorded was coming to devour Yultar and everything beyond it. Then it happened. From the edge of space, black shapes began to crawl into view. At first, only shadows, then glowing green cores, pulsing like heartbeats. The Varaxi were here. Thousands upon thousands of biomechanical ships surged forward in perfect formation. Long tendrils of energy wrapped around them like vines. The largest ones resembled floating hives, each capable of birthing hundreds of drone fighters in minutes. They did not slow. They did not send a message. The first wave accelerated, and within seconds, the front of the Council fleet opened fire. Brilliant beams of plasma and kinetic rounds filled the stars with light. The first Varaxi ships exploded, but more followed behind. The battle had begun. Except for the valiant. It remained still. While the rest of the armada engaged in chaotic combat, the Uns Valiant drifted forward, moving slowly and calmly, directly toward the heart of the Varaxi formation. Its engines didn't burn. Its hull made no noise. But it passed through the firing lines like a shadow slipping through firelight. The Council commanders watched in disbelief as the human vessel flew straight into the enemy swarm with no support. No firepower, no shield visible. Admiral Threx shouted for the ship to retreat. Several captains tried to contact it, but the Valiant never replied. It just kept moving. And then something strange happened. The Varaxi ships near the Valiant began missing their targets. Their weapons faltered. Their energy beams dispersed as if blocked by an invisible field. The ships that got too close veered. Off course, like magnets rejecting each other. It was as if the Valiant wasn't just flying through space. It was bending it. The battlefield sensors picked up impossible distortions. Light bent around the ship. Gravity signatures twisted. AI-controlled systems failed to track it. The Valiant wasn't dodging the enemy. It was disappearing and reappearing in ways that broke physics. Some officers called it a cloaking system. Others whispered it was something worse. Inside the Valiant. Captain Ward watched the enemy swarm pass around his ship like a tide breaking against stone. Riven's voice returned. All primary systems are charged. Targeting solutions acquired. Awaiting your command. Ward narrowed his eyes and spoke only 3 words. Open the silence. And for the first time, the Valiant spoke not in a voice, but in a sound wave that vibrated across every communication channel, every sensor, and even every ship hull. It was not a weapon blast. It was a pulse, low and deep, like the sound of a massive bell struck once in the dark. Every Varaxi ship paused. Every hive node shimmered. The swarm hesitated. Confused for the first time in its history. Then came a second pulse. This one shattered Varaxi formations. Their coordination broke. Their patterns fell apart. Individual ships began colliding. Some spun out of control. Others turned in the wrong direction. It was as if the Valiant had found their frequency and turned it against them. And all the while, it said nothing more. The silence that followed the second pulse from the Unzi Valiant was unnatural. The massive battlefield, once filled with roaring weapons and bursting lights, stood still in a quiet moment that made every heartbeat echo louder than any cannon blast. Across the fleets of the United Galactic Council, crews stared at their screens in disbelief. For the first time in living memory, the Varaxi swarm had stopped moving. Their endless hunger, their mechanical unity, their terrifying rhythm, all of it disrupted by a single ship that hadn't fired a single missile. But that silence did not last long. Whether it was confusion, panic, or sheer rage, the Varaxi suddenly surged forward with more violence than before, and the battle resumed with full force. Green beams cut across space. Swarms of drone fighters launched like screaming insects. Dozens of council ships exploded in the first minute. Shield barriers flickered and vanished. Communication channels filled with screams and orders. The enemy had reawakened, and it was furious. Admiral Threx clenched his jaw as he watched 3 of his Skoron cruisers vanish in a flash of white fire. The Varaxi were adapting, as they always did. He issued fresh commands, pushing the Skoron Armada into a defensive arc to protect the flanks of the main formation. The Council fleets tried to regroup, but the swarm came from all angles. Above, below, behind an ocean of death flooding the sky. Yet amidst the chaos, Threx kept one eye on the black shape gliding silently ahead. The Valiant was moving again, now deeper into the swarm. The Varaxi tried to fire on it. Beams of energy and explosive blasts lit the space around the vessel, but none of them hit. They didn't miss in the usual way. It was more like the blasts bent around the ship, passing beside it as if the Valiant wasn't fully present in their dimension. It didn't dodge, and it didn't block. It simply existed in a way that made their attacks meaningless. And then, just when it seemed the Valiant would continue this eerie pattern, the ship changed direction. It began gliding upward through the swarm, its engines still invisible, its surface as dark as the void itself. The Varaxi noticed. Dozens of enemy ships broke formation to chase the human vessel. The air around them twisted, gravity signals spiked, and sensor screens glitched, but they followed. That was their mistake. Inside the Valiant, Captain Elias Ward stood still, eyes watching calmly as the swarm reacted. Behind him, the AI known as Riven whispered new data. 16 enemy nodes pursuing. Cluster density within detonation range in 20 seconds. Ward nodded once, and without emotion said, "Execute sequence dusk." The moment the order left his lips, the Valiant shimmered and vanished, not cloaked, not hidden, gone. Enemy ships chasing it suddenly collided into each other, confused by its disappearance. But before any of them could retreat, the space they had entered began to fold, not explode, not ignite. Fold. Space itself bent inward like crumpling fabric. The enemy ships twisted with it. Their hulls stretched and broke apart, not from force, but from reality warping around them. There was no fire, no sound, only silent implosions as their engines were crushed by unseen pressure. By the time the rest of the swarm noticed, 16 ships had vanished into a tear in space, and the Valiant reappeared elsewhere, completely untouched. The Council fleet saw it all. They watched in stunned silence as a ship without visible weapons erased an entire hunting squad with nothing but a whisper of light. Many commanders stopped shouting. Some stood frozen, unable to explain what had just happened. A few even began to issue retreat commands out of fear, Yet the Valiant continued, gliding deeper into the core of the swarm, where no fleet dared enter. It wasn't part of any formation, no. It didn't respond to calls or show allegiance to any command. It was alone, but not weak. It was moving with purpose, straight toward the central hive node of the Varaxi fleet, where the largest and most dangerous vessels waited in silence. On board one of the Drow battleships, High General Suvek ordered every available drone to protect. The Valiant, thinking perhaps humanity had sent some last-resort experimental weapon, but even the drones couldn't keep up. They tried to form a shield around the human vessel, but its movement patterns were too strange. It didn't fly straight. It shifted through space like water flowing through cracks. Coordinates meant nothing around it. Enemy targeting became a joke. One Varaxi ship fired at the Valiant's last position and accidentally destroyed one of its own allies. Another tried to ram it and ended up spiraling into the gravitational pull of the Yoltar itself. It was as if the human ship was breaking the battlefield dot inside the Valiant. The hum of the ship deepened. Lights across the control panel turned red, and Riven spoke again. Hive core within range. Recommend activation of Sol Protocol. Captain Ward paused, his expression unreadable. His eyes stared at the screen, showing the vast, monstrous structure at the center of the Varaxi swarm. It was massive, almost the size of a moon covered, in glowing green veins and spikes of metal that extended like claws into space. Thousands of drones swirled around it. It was the source of the enemy's coordination, the brain of the hive. Ward raised his hand and pressed it against the screen. "Do it," he said. Beneath the ship, something unlocked. A circular chamber, hidden within the lower decks, began to rotate, revealing a sphere of unknown material, smooth, dark, and glowing with a strange light. It wasn't metal. It wasn't crystal. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The sphere rose into position, and the ship began to vibrate, not with sound, but with feeling. Every Varaxi ship near the Valiant suddenly stopped. Their lights dimmed. Their movements halted. It was as if they sensed something terrible, something ancient awakening dot. Then came the third pulse. But this one wasn't heard through speakers or sensors. It was felt inside, in the minds of every living being within range. The council crews clutched their heads. The Varaxi screamed across the telepathic bands. The battlefield trembled, not from explosion or impact, but from something deeper. The Sol Protocol had been activated, and no one, not even Earth's allies, knew what it meant. The silence after the third pulse was heavier than any sound, a strange and invisible weight that stretched across the battlefield, like a fog no one could see, but everyone could feel. The Varaxi swarm, known across galaxies for its unshakable unity and terrifying precision, suddenly froze in mid-attack. Ships that had been swarming the council fleets slowed down as if gripped by confusion. Drones hovered without orders. Their movement became clumsy, their formations fell apart, and their weapons dimmed. It was not a mechanical failure. It was something deeper. The entire swarm seemed to be experiencing a disruption no species had ever witnessed in combat before. Breakdown of command, of purpose, of thought. Across the fleets of the Galactic Council, sensors reported impossible readings. Neural activity among the Varaxi was fluctuating wildly, as if their shared consciousness had been severed by an invisible blade. Even their communication pulses, which normally screamed across the stars with wild intensity, now returned blank. No signals. No orders, just static. The only ship still moving with intent was the Uns Valiant, the lone vessel from Earth. Valiant glided through the enemy formation like a dark phantom. Its hull was untouched, its power core calm, and its presence radiated something no one could describe with science or language. The pulse it had sent out was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It had not exploded, burned, or crushed anything. Instead, it had resonated like a song sung not to the ears, but to the very fabric of living thought. Every Varaxi ship affected by it was still functional, but the creatures within were no longer connected. The hive mind had gone silent. Admiral Threx stood frozen on the bridge of his command ship, watching the impossible unfold. For centuries, the Varaxi had been unbeatable because they were not a fleet. They were one mind spread across millions of bodies. Remove that mind, and you didn't have a swarm. You had Chaos Dot as the Valiant drew closer to the heart of the enemy fleet. The hive core itself, a monstrous sphere of black and green metal, began to tremble. Energy spikes flared wildly across its surface. Drones flew into each other. Large command ships, once perfectly in sync, now spiraled in random directions. And the strangest part of it all was that the Valiant still had not fired a single visible weapon. It had not launched a missile, not opened a cannon, not activated a shield. All it had done was awaken something from within. Inside the Valiant, in a chamber deep beneath the bridge, the mysterious black sphere that had been revealed during the Soul Protocol activation hovered in its cradle of energy. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic glow, like a beating heart made of memory. Around it, strange symbols flickered across the walls, none of them written by human hands. The language was older than Earth's place in the stars. Captain Elias Ward stood alone, eyes locked on the data flowing into the core. The AI, Riven, whispered softly, the soul wave has disrupted all neural harmonics within the hive. Hive core destabilizing. Emotional bleed detected. Varaxi link is dissolving. Ward didn't smile, didn't flinch. He simply nodded once and walked to the command station. Continue the sequence, he said. They're not enemies anymore. They're lost. Let them remember. A sphere responded with a deeper glow, and a new wave of energy pulsed out, not violent, not hostile, but resonant and strange. This pulse didn't crash into ships or tear them apart. It moved through them like a soft breeze, brushing against old memories. Council sensors couldn't even track it. Only those who had experienced pain, loss, or grief seemed to sense it. Across the Council fleets, several officers felt tears in their eyes without knowing why. Others heard whispers in languages they didn't speak. One Tenvac captain suddenly dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by visions of forgotten faces. And in the heart of the Varaxi swarm, the true effect began. The Varaxi did not die. They woke up. Ships that had flown without thought suddenly paused, like sleepers startled awake. Drones twisted in confusion. The hive core began flashing in disorganized patterns. The swarm, once a single collective intelligence, was now a scattered sea of individuals. And in those minds, for the first time, emotions surfaced. Fear, sadness, guilt. The Soul Protocol had not destroyed them. It had given them something far worse, a conscience. Memories hidden deep within their code surfaced. Memories of who they were before they became the swarm. Creatures once consumed by the hive mind now remembered names, places, families. The pulse had not been meant to kill. It had been meant to free. Admiral Threx stared in awe as one of the largest Varaxi. Command ships turned away from battle and powered down its weapons. Then another. Then dozens more. The enemy was retreating not from defeat, but from revelation. All because of one human ship. Council commanders flooded the comm channels with questions. What weapon had been used? What kind of technology was the Soul Protocol? Why hadn't Earth told them they had such power? But the Valiant didn't respond. It hovered in the center of the fading chaos, silent as ever. On board, Captain Ward watched as the swarm unraveled, not with pride, but with a quiet sadness. They were never monsters, he said to Riven. Just prisoners. The AI responded with no words, only a quiet acknowledgement. The Valiant turned away from the hive core and began its departure. It didn't wait for celebration, didn't ask for thanks. It simply faded into the void, its engines activating in a strange twist of space and gravity. The Council fleets were left behind, victorious, but forever changed. No one had expected this. No one had imagined a battle like this one. The most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever known had been defeated, not by destruction, but by awakening. And the only ship that made it possible had already vanished. Long after the black shape of the Unzi Valiant disappeared into the stars, the battlefield remained still. The ships of the United Galactic Council hovered in silence, unsure if they had just witnessed a miracle, a warning, or something far stranger. The Varaxi swarm, once the most feared force in known space, now drifted without purpose. The once tight formations had scattered, the dreaded hive core shut down, and thousands of enemy ships simply floated powerless, confused, awake. No more waves of drones came. No final attack. The swarm, in all its size and power, had not been destroyed in battle, but unmade by something no one could explain. And because of that, a war that could have consumed half the galaxy had ended before it began. No planet was burned. No moons shattered. No billion lives lost. The fleets that had gathered to face extinction found themselves alive, not because they fought harder, but because one ship from a quiet world had chosen another path. Admiral Threx stood on the bridge of his Scarran warship, watching the drifting Varaxi vessels with an expression that blended confusion, respect, and something he rarely felt: humility. He had studied wars his entire life, built his name in battle, written strategies that were copied across dozens of species. Yet what had happened today was beyond any training, any theory. The Valiant had not fought by the rules of warfare. It had changed the field entirely. And Earth had sent it without warning, without arrogance, without asking for permission. Now, every admiral across the galaxy was trying to make sense of it. Questions filled every channel. What was the Sol Protocol? Was the sphere on board the Valiant a weapon, or something older? Had Earth known it would work, or had they taken a desperate gamble? Most disturbing of all, why did the Varaxi collapse when faced with it? The Council called for emergency meetings. The armadas returned to defensive positions around Yeltar. Unsure if the enemy would rise again, or if this strange peace was real, diplomatic ships rushed in from neutral sectors. Science vessels began scanning the disabled Varaxi ships carefully, searching for clues. A few Varaxi pilots had even surrendered, if that word could still apply. They did not speak, but they did not resist either. Their behavior was different now. They no longer operated like machines. Their gestures, their eyes, their movements slower, uncertain, as if feeling something unfamiliar, something like being alive. For many in the Council, it was both terrifying and beautiful. And at the center of it all was the ship that no one could trace, the Valiant, now gone without a signal, like a myth fading into legend before it could be fully understood. Back on Earth, in a quiet command center, beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, only a few officials monitored the live feed from the Valiant's last transmission. Captain Elias Ward's voice had not been heard since he gave the final order. The Sol Protocol was always a last resort, never meant to win wars, but to stop them before they could begin. Developed in silence over decades, it had come from a discovery made long before Earth joined the Council. A derelict object had been found orbiting a dead star, filled with strange data about consciousness, memory, and resonance. Earth scientists had decoded only part of it, but enough to build a system that could reach into the neural field of a collective mind and untie it from the inside. Not destroy, liberate. It had only one use, and it came with a cost. Once activated, it would never answer to orders again. The ship would make its own path after that. And now it had. Some believed the Valiant had returned to Earth. Others thought it had moved into deep space, where no species would follow. But a small few, those who understood its true nature, believed it was still out there, watching, listening, waiting. The Council held quiet discussions with Earth's leadership, demanding answers, requesting technology, asking for cooperation. But humanity offered none of it. Not from pride, not from selfishness, but from caution. The Valiant was not a weapon, Earth's ambassador said. It was a mirror. We chose not to destroy the enemy. We chose to show them what they had. Forgotten, that answer only raised more questions. Across the galaxy, the story spread. A single ship had ended a war by awakening memory inside a mind that had been asleep for centuries. And though no proof was ever released, some researchers began to suggest that the Varaxi had not always been a swarm that long ago. They had been a peaceful species before something turned them into a hive. The Valiant had simply reminded them who they used to be. Admiral Threx retired soon after, leaving a message behind for the next generation of commanders. In it, he wrote, "We expected to fight. We expected fire and fury. But the humans taught. Use something far more powerful. The greatest victories come not from destruction, but from understanding." His words were quoted across academies, printed in military journals, even inscribed on memorials for a war that never quite happened. Some still called it the Battle of Yaltar. Others called it the Day of the Valiant. But for many, it was simply the turning point, a moment when the galaxy realized it didn't need bigger guns. But deeper thinking got, as for the Varaxi, they slowly vanished from Council radar. Their ships drifted into empty space, not attacking, not colonizing, not communicating, just moving silently through the stars, perhaps searching for themselves. No one knew if they would return one day, but if they did, it would not be as monsters. And somewhere in the cold dark, the Valiant drifted on alone, unknown and forever silent. But legends say that if you listen carefully at the edge of certain starfields, you might hear a single deep pulse echoing in the void. Not a warning, not a threat, just a quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is a single ship that chooses peace.